What if I told you the biggest lie your brain is telling you is what your limits are? Now, don't take it from me. Today's concepts are going to be from Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And for those who are not aware of who David Goggins is, well, I believe this man was sent to Earth to prove everyone what the human mind and body are actually capable of. The book Can't Hurt Me is a very inspirational story about David Goggins sharing with us his journey from overcoming an abusive childhood, bullying, racism, poverty, obesity, starting at a fourth grade reading level to passing the ASVAB tests. And not just that, he proves the physical limits through extreme endurance sports, which are a perfect field to test what the brain and body are really capable of. Hi, my name is Paloma. I love reading books and breaking down the concepts so they are actually useful in your day to day life. When talking about human limits, both physical and mental, there is this illusion of what a person is actually capable of. Our brains primarily evolved for safety. So, not necessarily for your goals and ambitions and all of this, it is safety. And the brain, as it is the most caloric, expensive organ that you have in your body. It takes up about 20% of your total intake, which is crazy for it only being responsible for about 2% of your overall weight. And because it is very calorically expensive, what it does is maximize the body for efficiency. Because in the circumstances that we evolved, getting food and getting the calories necessary to sustain our lives came a bit harder. So our brains evolved to be sustainable and to maximize the efficiency of the energy that it spends. The illusion of limit starts to appear when the brain detects that the person is starting to go beyond their capabilities, beyond what they are used to. And when a person is starting to push themselves, the brain actually starts to send signals to the body, which signals that conscious part of your brain to slow down. You're overworking me right now. And I don't like that. And I'm sure we could all relate this, especially when it comes down to exercise. You know, when you got to put in that extra push up, but your arms are just giving up, or you're running that mile and your legs and your breathing and your body is just starting to cramp up and you're getting all these signals everywhere to stop. Where a lot of people fall short on this is when they give into what their brain and body is telling them and ultimately stop because they are at their limit. Now, for anybody who has attempted to get that extra rep in, you start to feel in the beginning fatigue, but then all of a sudden your body gets a little more warmed up and allows you to continue to finish the exercise. Or runners who can from one day not even complete a mile to then pretty rapidly start to build them up. Or when you start with that push up and you can't even do, but in no time, with dedication, persistence, and discipline, you will eventually be able to complete more than you thought. Now, why is this? How is it that you can go from not being able to do a few reps to within a short amount of time frame, whether that be within days, weeks, relatively short to the pace that you started at? Well, the more that you keep exercising that will to continue, you start to send these signals to your brain that are telling it, oh, we're safe. Oh, it's okay. We can push ourselves. And the brain starts to realize like, oh, we didn't die. We can actually we can keep going. And eventually you start building a tolerance to whatever task that you are dedicating persistence and discipline to. So bottom line, what the illusion of limits points to is that your physical capabilities are not capped at what you believe that your limits are. It is majority of the part psychological of what you can achieve. And a couple of examples that David Goggins shows this is through his first major journey through wanting to get into the SEALs program, but just 3 months before the boot camp, he had to prove himself by losing a significant amount of weight, by being in great physical condition, and by having the cognitive intelligence to pass the required tests. And what just seems impossible about this situation is that 3 months before, he was a little over 100 pounds overweight. On his first try on a single mile, he couldn't even get a quarter mile done. And he couldn't even swim. And not to mention that he had a fourth grade reading level, along with a neurodivergent type of cognitive disability that was a result of his childhood trauma and the obstacles that he had faced growing up. Now, the pure will of wanting to prove himself, he goes out and does the impossible, teaching himself how to swim. Not only that, but the SEALs are notorious for their types of physical and mental tests, which are designed to take the most mentally strong candidates, which is why the SEALs have the reputation that they have. And so, in no time, with just pure will, discipline, and persistence, he was able to go from all of these circumstances to making it into the boot camp, and not only making it into the boot camp, but by applying the principles that he had learned while getting to that point, he started to develop a confidence in himself. From just 3 months prior, having all of these obstacles in his way, not only finishing the Buds boot camp, but exceeding and proving himself to be the uncommon amongst the uncommon. A major reason why most people never end up discovering their full potential is by a concept that David Goggins calls the comfort trap. Like I mentioned earlier, the human brain is wired to keep you safe, to keep you comfortable, and to be as energetically efficient as possible. In the example of initially working out and you feel that your body can just like not take it and it feels like you can't do it, it's because your brain is wanting to keep you on a zone that is comfortable. It doesn't deem it necessary. It doesn't understand your goals or what you were trying to accomplish. That is why we ended up involving the prefrontal cortex, or your thinking brain, to be able to distinguish between the body signals and that conscious, decisive decision-making part of yourself. Now, the interesting thing about comfort is that it's not bad, but if you are somebody who is trying to go to the next level, is trying to reach their full potential, is trying to become uncommon amongst the uncommon, as he says, discomfort is an absolute necessity, because only through discomfort are you able to grow and expand what your mind and body are actually capable of. The only way to tell your mind and your body that we can take it a step further is through discomfort. And so by ultimately embracing discomfort, one thing about it is that discomfort makes you face reality. It makes you confront limits, weakness, fears, and not because suffering here is the goal, but because discomfort exposes growth. You know that saying that the only way out is through? Yeah, so this is basically the point. Like, you'll never know what you are truly capable of if you don't push yourself to the limits and beyond. And again, this takes a very special type of person, a very brave type of person, a person who can look at themselves and confront their own ego, a person who can tell themselves, I am not pushing myself to my full potential. And the thing about comfort is that, again, it is not bad, but over time, it keeps you stagnant. It keeps you at a certain level. And this is a bit dangerous because a lot of people will live their whole lives having all of these ambitions and dreams. And because things are fearful, things are scary, things don't feel right, they take that as their ultimate sentence. And by never actually going through that, they never discover what they are actually capable of. And I think this is a concept very relevant in today's age, especially with social media, with TikTok, Instagram. All of these apps are designed to give you instant gratification. And over time, that actually starts to rewire your brain to even more have instant amounts of comfort. And so your brain even more is not willing to feel that discomfort. It's not willing to have that delayed gratification that we as humans evolved with. We didn't evolve in a time where dopamine-filled types of food were available to us at all given times. We had to work hard for food, for shelter, for partners, for life in general. And so, if somebody in today's age is able to truly comprehend that, they have such an advantage to be one of the uncommon amongst the uncommon. I love that phrase. In terms of measuring where the body has limits and where it can actually go, Goggins tells us about the 40% rule. The 40% rule is this epiphany that he had during one of the most intense trainings that a human body can go through during Hell Week on his way to become a SEAL. And for those who don't understand the severity of what Hell Week consists, it is basically about 5.5 days of brutal physical and mental challenges where these candidates barely get any sleep. They are in freezing waters. They are put in situations that would annihilate any normal citizen. And what Goggins saw is that there were so many people that appeared to be stronger than him, appeared to be more tough, but these guys were slowly quitting and quitting. And another thing about this recruitment process is that a very small percentage of people actually make it through, which is what makes this team very notorious. In a sense, they truly pick the most strong ones throughout the whole group. In an instance where he was having broken bones, his body giving up, he tells about his experience with something that we have called the protective governor, which is responsible for sending the signals to the body and provoking negative thoughts to make that conscious part of yourself to stop and dwindle down before the real danger or the actual failure of the body even begins. And so through this basically torture, he pushes through it and he gets to this point, almost like a flow state, where he was able to override that pain and give this almost supernatural energy that allowed him to continue these impossible tasks. Like, mind you, again, broken bones, in water testing, near drowning, heart racing, no sleep. These are conditions that the human body are not wired for. Another example is when he was trying to raise money for a warrior foundation that allowed financial aid for those fallen soldiers, for their families, their kids' colleges. And so this was a mission very important and dear to him. And in doing so, he put himself to run a 100-mile race with no prior preparation, something that would annihilate any normal citizen. And through this treacherous journey, running on broken bones, having his body literally give up on him, but what allowed him to keep going was by tapping into this limitless reservoir of energy that he created, which is a concept that he calls the cookie jar, which derives from something in his childhood when his family had escaped an abusive family member and they were facing intense poverty. And something that his mom always made sure to do was have a cookie jar with cookies at all time. And despite all of these horrible circumstances that he was enduring as a child, that cookie jar gave him almost a sense of no matter how deep and ugly things get, there is always that one cookie, that one moment of joy, that one moment representing everything's going to be okay. At the end of the day, he always had a cookie in his cookie jar. And that later became his reservoir of energy. But instead of filling the cookie jar with cookies, he filled them with every single thing that he managed to conquer in his life, from an abusive household, from racism, from losing 100 pounds in under 3 weeks, completing SEALs. All of these things that should have not been possible, he was able to do. So all of these things accumulate and give him a sort of confidence that act as an energy reservoir. And during this race where it was very alone, where last time during the training, he was able to get more motivation and inspiration from the colleagues around him, but he was put in a situation in this race where he was faced with his own self. And so there was nowhere to look or turn. It was him against him. And so by relying on his own accomplishments and what he had been through, he was able to complete a 100 race when his body was completely giving up, just running off pure will. And that is where he truly discovered about the 40% rule. Even though he had felt multiple times that he was at his 100% way earlier in the race, he was able to muster up the energy to continue and finish and give it his whole 100%. And that is what the 40% rule is, that most people only operate at the 40% of their total capabilities. Now, the question is, how can somebody actually know their full potential, what they are truly capable of? And we don't have to be a Goggins and go through all of that, but everyone can benefit from these lessons. And what the number one thing here, what was the actual starting point in his transformation, was when he decided to stop victimizing himself and to start taking full accountability where he was in life, to stop blaming these external circumstances that made him realize that the only true obstacle that was halting him from reaching his potential was his own mind. And he tells about that moment where he looks at himself in the mirror, calling it the accountability mirror, and faces himself with the true reality. In this moment, he's overweight, has debt, is in an unhappy work environment, not working out, not taking care of himself, which is what ultimately led him to that circumstance. By taking full accountability and stop seeing himself as a victim, he overrode that mental loop that kept him going in the direction that he was headed in life. And that's when he decided to take the rails and take control of his life, actually do the work necessary to grow and actually develop the discipline that is only achievable through action. By acknowledging that his own destiny is up to him, and the only option that he has is either to stay in the way that he is or to actually push himself and explore to what he is truly capable of. To reach one's potential, he gives us the idea of callousing the mind. For example, when you are hitting weights and you develop calluses on your hands to allow you to have that protection, adapt, and keep going and handle these weights. Same concept happens in the mind. Only when a person tests themselves and faces discomfort, the mind starts to callous, it starts to adapt, and it starts to work with the conscious brain, but only through discipline, through persistence, and through work ethic. Through pure will are these only achievable. This may seem easier than it sounds, but it really does take a very special type of person to look at themselves in the mirror, face their own ego, and tell themselves that it is their own fault. And that is very hard to do given how the human brain is wired, to keep our sense of self intact, to keep us at a comfort level, not spend all of this extra energy in something that the brain doesn't deem necessary for its survival, something extraordinary that a human being can go through. That is the end of today's video. I hope you learned something from this very inspiring story. I really recommend that you guys check it out. After reading this book, I definitely have pushed my own self and seen my own potential navigate in levels that I never really thought was possible. So extraordinary read, and I'll see you here for the next video. Bye.